While it is true that there is no dearth of government schemes to promote agriculture or donor agencies pumping money to boost agricultural production in Asia as well as in sub-Saharan Africa, if it is reaching the right segment is an important question and often a debatable one. This has acquired critical dimension in view of the danger posed to food security due to the pandemic of COVID-19. It is also equally critical to understand that there is no one approach to deal with this vexed issue without realizing the many layers of farming community. One major reason why we have not been able to promote mechanization or nurture entrepreneurship at the bottom of pyramid is that the focus always has been on the other segments. Why do I say this? Let me elaborate on this. The rural landscape comprises of 5 segments. The top of the order is the large-scale commercial enterprises. Next comes the traditional landholders and enterprises, followed by subsistence agriculture households and micro enterprises. Then comes the landless rural households and micro enterprises. And at the bottom are the chronically poor rural households without any support system. The large-scale commercial operators are usually linked to powerful politicians of the state and have the muscle and wherewithal to tweak with the policies in their favor. Easy availability of influence and finance makes them formidable players in the rural, regional, state, and the world market. This group can afford high-end John Deere tractors and other sophisticated tools that agriculture requires. These groups also provide seasonal jobs to contract farmers. But other than this, whether their existence and business helps the bottom of pyramid is a debatable issue. The second category of traditional landholders are usually the local influential people, and they have large landholdings. They engage both in subsistence and commercial production. But more often they tend to rely on their experience and tend to ignore expert advice. The siblings of these landholders find agriculture unattractive and often seem to be migrating to urban centers for livelihood. The third category of farmers belong to the subsistence households who may or may not have any tillable land of their own, and they do all kinds of odd jobs to survive. They're often seen as contract farm workers and move to other states for work as farm labor. The fourth and the fifth category of farmers do not own any land. They are mostly debt-ridden. Loans taken at exorbitant rates from local loan sharks, often driven to suicide due to inability to pay back the loan and interest. This group is the most vulnerable of the 5 groups that I talked about. As per one report by McKinsey, in India, the average debt of a farming household in this category has risen 5-fold in a decade, while increase in farm income have not kept up. And more than 300,000, I repeat, 300,000 Indian farmers have committed suicide since 1995. It is this group that needs attention from all. They not only suffer from extreme poverty, but are prone to diseases like HIV, AIDS, droughts, floods, and other risk-prone environment. In India, in many states, the left-wing extremism has always targeted this vulnerable group for recruitment and indoctrination in their cadre. Poor and uneducated farmers are always exposed to variety of risks, above all seasonal risks and unsteady income flows associated with rain-fed agriculture. There is very little social security net that is available for these groups. One way to change this depressing scenario is to identify potential entrepreneurs systematically and scientifically from these very vulnerable segments and build clusters of excellence around them. This is possible only if the financing institutions think out of the box and provide necessary finance for business, which includes support for mechanization as well. More relevant information via digital tools will surely empower them significantly. The Nobel Prize winner Muhammad Yunus of Bangladesh proved that everyone is a natural entrepreneur. His radical idea, established in poverty-stricken Bangladesh in the 1970s, was that if poor people were given a proper start and encouragement, their natural entrepreneurship would flourish. Human beings are not born to work for anybody else, he said. For millions of years that we were on the planet, we never worked for anybody. We are go-getters, we are farmers, we are hunters. We lived in caves and we found our own food. We did not send job applications. So this is our tradition, according to Dr. Yunus. There are roughly 170 million people all over the world in microcredit, mostly women, and they have proven one very important thing, that we are all entrepreneurs. Illiterate rural women in the villages, in the mountains, take tiny little loans, $20, $30, $40, and they turn themselves into successful entrepreneurs. Keeping these factors in mind, we at EcoDev have always been focusing on the poor smallholder farmers who fall in the fourth and the fifth category and are trying to identify the presence of entrepreneurship, trainability, creditworthiness, and resilience in them through administration of psychometric tools. Our research has found out that smallholder farmers are creditworthy but fall out of the loan basket as they would not be able to produce any collateral which is acceptable to the financial institutions. Often banks follow a very straitjacketed process of determining creditworthiness. Many a times it is proven that big businessmen who are chased by the banks are the ones who default on their borrowings. Honesty does not appear to be their forte, but it surely is for the smallholder farmer. In the immortal drama penned by George Bernard Shaw, Pygmalion, the flower girl, Liza Doolittle, wants to have tuition from Professor Higgins, as she wants to be a lady speaking proper English and proper ways of speaking and behaving. Professor Higgins asks her, "Come back to business, how much do you propose to pay me for the lessons?" And she replies, "Oh, I know what's right. A lady friend of mine gets French lessons for 18 pence an hour from a real French gentleman. Well, you would not have the face to ask me the same for teaching me my own language as you would for French. So I won't give more than a shilling. Take it or leave it." To which Professor Higgins replies, "You know, Pickering, if you consider a shilling not as a simple shilling, but as a percentage of this girl's income, it works out as fully equivalent to 60 or 70 guineas from a millionaire." This is a very poignant conversation wherein a flower girl shows her intention of offering 2/5 of her day's income as fees. This shows that despite coming from very poverty-stricken background, they have the honesty and willingness to pay back the borrowings. Upon identification of the degree of entrepreneurship, we then categorize them as champions, as masters, and as rookies, and we work on creating a business plan which gets monitored on a quarter-on-quarter basis. Such an approach has yielded rich dividends in our projects in Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria in Africa, and in India and Bangladesh in Asia. In conclusion, I would like to say it is critical and important to identify the flower girls from the smallholder farmers and make them into princesses. That is the Pygmalion effect we hope to usher in. Thank you very much.